I have gotten some pretty great feedback on my tutorial for the Headway wrapper system, and I've actually had several, one just recently, requests that I do a few more tutorials as far as Headway is concerned. And I was telling them on social media that sometimes it's hard because I have to balance doing these tutorials with what I do for a living. But one of the recommendations was learning how to create a website from start to finish. So I am actually getting ready to revamp one of my own websites, my Girly Girl Geek portion of my Clerical Advantage website. And so my thought was that I could perhaps do a step-by-step, probably 3 or 4 different steps. So it'll be 3 or 4 different tutorials released at different times on how I redesign or create this website from start to finish. And this video tutorial is step 1. And as much as I would love to just dive right into the drag and drop portion of Headway, the visual editor, to be honest, the way that I do this process means that I don't touch the Headway visual editor yet. And I think that this is one of the things that happens with people that are new to Headway. You get really excited about being able to go in there and just draw your design and go in there. And for some people that works fantastic. But for me, I tend to get in there and get a little sidetracked because there's so many things that you can do in the visual editor. So step 1 for me is planning. And I know that a lot of web designers do it this way too. They plan things out first. So it's very important that you go through some sort of a planning process before you dive right in, or else you are going to get overwhelmed and feel like you're in over your head right away, especially if you're new to Headway. So the first thing that I do is I decide on the layout that I want for my website. And I do that by, you definitely look around the web, you see items that you like, little pieces of websites that you think would work well for your purposes. And so you come up with a design, and what I do, and what many people do, is I create a wireframe or a mock-up. So what I do is first I decide on, how I want my homepage to look and how I want my inner pages to look. And then the next thing I do is I create a wireframe. Now, there are lots of programs out there that people do this in. Some people do it in Photoshop. Other people do it in online programs that are designed strictly to do wireframing for websites. I personally have come to really like using PowerPoint to create my design wireframe. What I do is I pull up my PowerPoint, and underneath the design section you can select your slide size, and I choose the A4 size in portrait, which gives me this longer, it's thinner and longer slide, so it gives me more real estate to work with so that I can actually get that entire design for that front page on there. But it's also very easy to work in PowerPoint with all of the different tools that you have as far as creating your shapes and smart art and all of that. So what I've done here is I've done a simple mock-up for my new site. I want navigation on 2 sides of a logo image. That's going to be tricky, and that's going to be some advanced CSS coding, and even though I will probably show that to you in future steps, that's something that I didn't take on until I'd been working with WordPress and Headway for quite some time. But this is the design that I'm planning on. I want this area, the navigation and the logo, to stay put. And when people scroll, I want anything below that to kind of scroll up into the top. So I've marked here that I want this to scroll. Then I know that I want a feature text area with some images right underneath that navigation and logo. And then I want to have a section where I have some features. for my business, and there'll be probably between 3 and 6, but I've put 6 there in the wireframe. And underneath that, you'll see this is like the universal symbol for an image. And what's going to happen here is there's going to be an image and possibly some text underneath. It's probably going to be pulling in some information from some of my pages. And then below that is what we call in Headway circles a widgetized footer. A lot of people call it an information footer, but what it is it's going to be an area that's in a different color down below that's going to have contact info, social media info, and a mailing list sign up. And then below that is the footer where my copyright is going to be. So as you can see, it's given me a pretty good idea of how the layout is going to go as far as that's concerned. And then if we look at my second wireframe, this is for the inner pages, and we've got the same top part, but then you'll see that this is a content area that's going to pull in page content, post content, whatever. It's going to be other content. And then you see the widget footer, widgetized footer, and the copyright footer remain the same. So I've got my wireframes all worked up, and I don't get too detailed, but I get detailed enough so that I can start doing a couple of things. And I like to do these things in advance of going into Headway and creating, because it keeps me from getting frustrated, because I get to a point where it's like, oh, I can't do anything else until. So the third thing that I do after I've created these wireframes is I create any custom graphics that I'm going to have. So for example, I know that I'm probably going to want a graphic like this. So I use paint.net. I'm giving you some of my insider tips here on how I create my items, but I decide what I want for images, and you don't have to know them all, but you're going to know your basics. You're going to know that you're going to want to, that logo image. I know I want that circular logo image. I knew that I wanted images to go with that feature text, which is what this is going to be. So go in and try to create the images that you know you're going to want. You know you're going to want social media buttons. So go and find those and choose those. Have all of those things ready so that when you get to that point in your website creation, that you don't have to stop and go either have those made or make them yourself or go and find them, because it kind of breaks up that design process in Headway, and then you start to rethink your design, and it can cause you to go off on tangents. And it can just get frustrating. So for me, this works for me. It might not work for you, but I'm giving you my step-by-step. So I create my images, or as many of them as I know that I need in advance. What do I do then? Well, then I go back to my wireframe. I look at it, and I'm like, okay, now what am I going to use to create these areas? Now, we already know that Headway has the navigation, so I'm going to be okay there. We have the header block that my logo image is going to go in, and that's fine. I'm going to be combining the two. So am I going to position that round logo with CSS coding, or am I going to use a plugin specifically for Headway that will allow me to put blocks within blocks, like the utility block plugin? This is where I decide these things. What am I going to need to get this effect? What am I going to need for this feature text area? Am I just going to use a text block and then break these into posts and do the excerpt thing? I could, and it might be a little bit harder to get a uniform look. What I'm actually going to do is use the feature block. It's from the extend area in Headway. I really like those specific Headway blocks. They're really helpful, and they're $25. Most of them are around $25 more. And I've slowly purchased them to add to my arsenal, and I have quite a few of them that I use and really enjoy, and they really give you a polished, finished look. So here I know, okay, in order to get this feature area, I'm going to use the features block. Now what about down here? Two things. Again, I could use a regular content block and pull in material, make those areas posts and pull in posts and have them come through. If it was a blog, that would be perfect. In my case, it's not a blog, it's going to be pages. So what I'm probably going to do is use an article block, the Headway article block here, in order to get that nice uniform look and to pull in the page material with the image and a little bit of an excerpt of text. I will choose that article block. Then down here, I'm definitely going to use the widget block, except I'm going to turn it horizontally. So I know that that's what I'm going to use there, and then I've got my footer block here. And then I would do the same thing. I would go to my individual pages and I would decide, am I going to need anything special here? What am I going to need for plugins? And once I decide on all of those, then I would log into the back end of my site and I'm going to install the plugins that I need there. So I'm going to upload, sometimes I'll upload my images, sometimes I won't. I just always know where my images are when I need them. And I definitely will upload any of the plugins that I need, whether they be Headway plugins or whether they're things like security plugins from regular WordPress or the Jetpack or whatever. Any of the plugins that I feel that I'm going to need. If I'm going to need a contact form plugin, then I'm going to load that. All of those I'm going to preload before I ever touch the Headway Visual Editor. And in the Step 2 video, we are going to dive into the actual creation process within the Visual Editor.